Well, hello and welcome to the Merge Podcast with Zachary Thaggard, and I'm so excited to share with you about education, politics, religion, and productivity. Today we're talking about living together and merging life together. And so I have a good friend of mine, Janine Hume-Dawson, who is a first-generation American of Sierra Leone, active duty Army officer, and in graduate school for clinical mental health counseling with an emphasis in trauma to become a licensed counselor. And so we are so excited to have her on our podcast today as she shares with us about some things that she believes can help us to be able to be more disciplined and to be our authentic self. All right. So Janine, tell me a little bit about yourself.
Thank you for having me. I'm so excited to be here and to be a part of this conversation. A little about myself, as you'd already shared. I'm a first-generation American. Both of my parents were born and raised in Sierra Leone, Africa. I feel like that being tied to that culture has played a huge role in how I see the world and how I show up. I'm very proud of where I come from. Let's see, what else? I'm a proud graduate of Alcorn State University. I graduated in 2019 with a bachelor's in psychology. I am continuing my education at Grand Canyon University, and as you mentioned before, I'm getting my master's in clinical mental health counseling with an emphasis in trauma. I do want to be a licensed counselor, but the end goal is to be a clinical psychologist, and I want to do some other things too, but one step at a time.
I got you.
Let's see what else. Outside of education, I'm an officer in the Army, active duty. I do human resource. A lot of paperwork, working with personnel. So that's a bit of my my background.
Well, Janine, so what is your morning routine? I know that you are an officer and you also you are in grad school. So I was trying to see, as a professional person, what is your morning routine?
Okay, so my morning routine depends on what I'm doing that day. And it changes. Mm-hmm. So for instance, if I have to do a training session with my commander or people that I work with, I'm getting up at 5 o'clock in the morning, 4:50, and then I'll go to that session. After doing that session, which is usually an hour, 30 minutes, after that, come home, I shower. If I have time, I will read a devotional. Most of these days, I haven't had a lot of time. So my prayers are usually said while I'm doing things. Mm-hmm. It's interesting, when I was younger, or when I was first starting my walk with Christ, I felt like prayers had to be so formal, and not to bash, if you want to pray formally, you can, but now I can kind of do other things and pray as well. So I'm sorry?
You good.
Oh, so just because I am short on time, I pray on the go. After showering, get ready for work, show up there at 09. From 9 to 5, I am a human resource officer. So I'm doing a lot of paperwork, sending emails, calling people, planning for those sorts of things. Now, my morning routine will shift if I do not have to do a training session with my commander or my coworkers. So I am not a morning person, mm-hmm. and I know that goes against the grain because I am an officer in the military, yes. But I'm actually really a night owl. A lot of my productivity, I've kind of just noticed I accomplish a lot more later on in the day, kind of like mid-afternoon into the late evening. So if I don't have to wake up early, I typically wake up 6:30, 7. I try not to reach for my phone and go to social media right away. If I'm going to open up any app on my phone, it's going to be the devotional. I'll say my prayer for the day, and then I start, getting ready, put on my uniform, go to work, 9 to 5. And then after work, I'll have to do a workout. And then after the workout, come home, shower, study, discussion post, write a paper, whatever's called of me for that week. And then, eat dinner. If I have time, talk to family and friends.
So I know that you live in another country. You're not in America anymore.
Yes.
And so you were moved to Japan. So can you share a little bit about that and how it's important to have self-discipline when you are in another sphere as you're still trying to do your professional work? So.
Okay. So I actually applied for this position. An opportunity came. I really wanted to challenge myself. So as I had shared earlier, my parents are immigrated to America. And I remember when I was growing up, I really was intrigued by how they assimilated to, Western culture, kind of like some of the hurdles that they had to overcome. And so I wanted to challenge myself to do the same. And so that's part of the reason why I applied for this job. Now, since coming here, it's a huge adjustment. Not only is it a language barrier, you have to learn and understand their culture, their mindset, why they do the things that they do. And you have to have this posture of cultural humility. And what I mean by cultural humility is you respect another person's culture. You respect the fact that you're not going to understand all of the idiosyncrasies, all of the niches, all of the tendency, just all of the little things that makes their culture their culture.
Correct.
And when you understand that you know nothing, you're then able to approach it and be willing to learn. Oftentimes when people realize that they don't know something, they tend to panic and they try to almost like deflect. You can't do that in a foreign country. It doesn't smooth over well for you. Because of the nature of my job, I'm in direct contact with a lot of, they call them host nation employees. So these are born, bred Japanese people. And it's like you're coming into their country, you're coming into their workspace, you're coming into their territory. You cannot demand certain things. And just one thing, for instance, is like, sometimes I find myself getting frustrated because I'm like, oh, well, this is not in English, but you have to check your privilege. Why would it be in English? Like, why would it be in English? There's not any Americans here. So why don't I take the time to learn Japanese language? Now, the second part of your question, discipline. I would just say, as an Army officer, PCSing overseas, you have to be disciplined because not only are you, it can be a huge financial strain. And I'll just give you an example. So one of their cultural traditions here is when you are renting out a place, you have to pay 3 months in advance. If I did not have a budget, if I was not disciplined financially, I wouldn't have been able to find a place to stay.
Wow.
And that's just one example. I'm trying to think of how else I can intertwine discipline. Because honestly, discipline is, I don't know how else to intertwine discipline, but you definitely have to be disciplined to coexist in somebody else's country. And I think to have cultural humility and to maintain that posture of humility, you have to be disciplined. You could argue
you're
that
speaking something very powerful about how everyone has to have cultural humility about another person's culture, because sometimes we're quick to talk about somebody's culture without really embracing what they provide and who they are as a framework for something bigger. And That's
You
powerful.
also have to check your, and I love what you said when you were talking, people come in assuming things. So we could say like stereotypes
Mm-hmm.
are almost implicit bias, right?
Right.
Coming to a different country, I'm telling you, all of those things are challenged
Right.
because it's so easy to assume, well, based off of what I've seen in the media
Mm-hmm.
or what I've read from certain articles that are biased,
Right.
you would assume, well, Asians act this way and Asians are supposed to do this.
Mm-hmm.
But it's challenged every single day because you'll find that they don't do those things.
Right.
They don't follow into the stereotype.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah.
And so that's important for other cultures to not fall into the stereotype, not to follow into conversations about things that people put out just because they may hate another culture. But it's important
Right.
that as representatives of Christ and representatives of the kingdom, that we continually be open to embrace other cultures. And even though we might not agree with some things, we have to continually move forward in an effort of love and compassion towards others. And so that's an important thing. I like
Yes.
that cultural humility. I'm going to take that from you. I got another question for you. When you first started as a officer, what's something that was more challenging than you? So when you were first started as an officer, what's something that was more challenging than you expected?
Okay. I will say two things. I think the first thing was, I will say they definitely, I had professors that talked about this when I was in college, and they talked about the importance of time management.
Right.
When you become an officer in the military, and I cannot speak for everybody's experience. I went through ROTC. I had a great experience in ROTC. I had wonderful cadre. And they also talked about the importance of time management. But there's a transition, there's a shift that happens the second you commission, and it's nobody is running after you
Right.
anymore. You
Right.
know, nobody is, there's the expectation of you have to perform and you have this level of authority and you have to execute, and you are a leader now. And so people are looking to you to be the example. And so it can be, I remember for me, it was a bit overwhelming because I felt as though I wasn't ready. Yeah, I felt as though I wasn't ready. I felt like, okay, I have really, really big shoes to fill. You also have to understand, I graduated and commissioned. I was only 21 years old. You know,
Oh, wow.
It's that type of thing. It's that type of thing where you think that you're grown. You think that you're grown, and then you start to adult a little bit.
Right.
You start paying bills and you start actually going to work and having a job, and you're just like, okay, I'm not as grown as I think. So I would say the time management was the biggest thing, because you have all of these responsibilities within your job. And then on top of that, you have soldiers, whether it be in your shop or whether it be within your organization, that are looking to you and watching you. I think the only, what can I compare it to? It's like if you have siblings, and like your parents are always telling you, like, you got to do a good job because your little sister is watching you, your little brother is watching you. It's that equivalent, but you also have the responsibility of like somebody's life in your hands. That's how serious it can get, especially when we start talking, like combat arms. I just, and not just to say I just do paperwork. I do have a lot of responsibility too, but that's always in the back of your head of like, if we were to go into combat, I'm responsible for this person.
Right.
So that's
right.
kind of like where the authority aspect goes to it too. I'm trying to think of the other thing that I had to learn. I think the other really big shock to me was, so prior to graduating, I never worked at like McDonald's. I
Right,
didn't,
right.
all of the jobs that I had, I remember I was a counselor. That was like my junior year during the summer for one of the programs that they had for the kids. I can't remember what the program was called. And then I think before that, I was babysitting. So I didn't really have, I didn't have my big girl job. And so again, the level of expectation, and you have to perform in this job. You know, you're being evaluated. And again, you have people looking up to you, and I just realized how serious it was.
Right.
Not to say that I didn't know what I was getting myself into. I did, but it's almost as if, you know, when I was in ROTC, you learn about being an officer in theory, right? And then once you actually graduate and commission, now you're putting it to practice. And sometimes theory can be romanticized, and you don't really feel the full effect until you're actually doing it. Yeah, hopefully I'm making sense.
You are. So that's why it's important that when you went into the field, that you were being yourself, that you didn't allow anybody to make you somebody else. I see it a lot in certain fields, that certain friends of mine have went through their professional work where they have changed from being themselves to what that person or that group of people want them to be. And in the end, it falls back on them because they didn't come in with being themselves. And me, myself, I'm always trying to be myself. And I'm very vocal.
Yes.
Very vocal. And some people say I'm opinionated, but it's a part of my life, a part of how I'm wired. So that's how we are able to make a difference. That's how we're able to be the change that others need to see, as by us being ourselves. So,
yes,
what has fundamentally changed about you personally from when you first started in your field? You started at 21. So now you're 25, yes. And so...
No, 24.
24. Oh, I'm making you older. Okay. All right.
Don't age me.
All right, you're 24. So what has changed from 21 to 24? What has fundamentally changed from 21 to 24 that has helped you personally?
Man, that's such a good question. There's so many things. I would say the biggest thing is emotional maturity.
Oh, wow.
I think emotional maturity is built just going through things, going through life. You'll go through situations where you'll realize, okay, I can't be immature about this. Like you'll go through situations that require you to grow up. So I would say emotional maturity. I think the next thing that I would say is my understanding of discipline, commitment. In terms of like discipline and commitment, when you start thinking about, okay, I want to achieve X amount of things, right? You can't just approach it any kind of way. You almost have to be methodical with it. And in your approach, you have to be committed and you have to be disciplined.
Right.
And I think my biggest thing was, you can have feelings attached to a goal or, you know, whatever you're trying to achieve. But every single day, those feelings are going to fluctuate. You're not going to want it as bad as you did on the first day that you started. And so you have to learn how to separate the two. You have to choose commitment and discipline over how you feel. And I feel like, and again, that also kind of drives into or merges with emotional maturity. All of them kind of flow to, I think those are some of the biggest things that I've learned since being in my profession. I think the other thing, though, too, is you reap what you sow.
Yeah, that's true.
I've always known that, but when you come into a profession and you're a novice, you don't know anything. Sometimes people will test you. They will test your competence. They will test you by almost like challenging you to see if you're going to buckle, if you're going to withstand the challenge. And so your work ethic is going to speak for yourself.
Mm.
You may not know everything, and that's fine. You just started, but are you willing to learn?
Right.
Are you willing to learn from your mistakes and keep going? Yeah. Yeah.
Well, I like where you said about commitment, like being committed to the cause, committed to your assignment.
Yeah.
And
you got to see it through.
You got to see it through. You got to see that assignment
Yes.
through. And so with that, I understand that your mother was in the military, and now your sister is going into the military.
She is. She commissioned this last summer. So she's in the Air Force.
Oh, she's in the Air Force. So I'm trying to figure out how has your mother influenced you all's trajectory, and by her being in the military, what drove you all to that, and what caused you all to go down that road? Because you didn't have to do the military, but what?
I know I didn't have to. So I'm gonna be very transparent. I'm gonna tell the truth. So when my mom first approached me about possibly joining the military, I was against it. And I will say that I just wasn't educated enough. So when we first started talking about joining the military, I believe I was finishing up my junior year of high school, beginning my senior year of high school. And we were also in the process of moving. So the high school that I was at currently did not have a JROTC program. And the high school that I was going to did have a JROTC program. And so my mom was telling me, oh, like, you would make an excellent officer. I think you would be so good at it. You should just try it. You never know. You'll love it. And I was like, no, I am not going to be in the military. I do not want to be on the front lines. And that's where she checked me. She was like, not everybody is in the front lines. There's actual careers that you can have in the military. There's all of these different MOSs. So that was kind of like how it started. I went to Surrattsville High School in Prince George's County in Maryland. Again, I was only there for a year, but I did their Air Force JROTC program. And the deal was, my mom was like, just try it for one semester. If you don't like it, you can drop it and you can take another elective, but just try. So I tried it and I ended up loving it. I loved it. I loved how, you're a part of something bigger than yourself. I love how you're surrounded by like-minded people that challenge you and push you in the best way to. I love the cohesion part of it and just the community aspect of it. That's what drew me to the military. And then, once I did that for a year, when I started doing research on, okay, well, how am I going to pay for college? ROTC came on the table, and, you can get contracted as a sophomore. That's the route that I took. Yeah. They paid for my school, and then I was on my way to commissioning in 2019. But it was a very long journey, because it was like 5 years in the making.
Wow.
So
that's powerful. So I know that you are overseas. So how has moving overseas helped you to experience life differently? Because you have this you had this westernized lifestyle, and now you had to move into another country. And you spoke about challenges earlier, but I wanted to know what experience have you seen differently from America to Japan or Asia itself?
Okay. So I just kind of want to orient the viewers, our audience. So I am in Kure, which is about 35, 40 minutes away from Hiroshima. If you know your history, Hiroshima is where the atomic bomb was dropped. Right. So the city that I'm in, it's not the biggest city, but it's not the smallest city either. It's like, an in-between. Most of the people that are there is definitely older generation, and the very few young people that are here are leaving and or most of them live in Hiroshima. They only come to Kure for work, and then they go back home. So there's that. Some of my biggest challenges. So when I first got to Kure, I did not have a vehicle for almost 4 months, 4 or 5 months. So that was very interesting for me because I've never had to depend on public transportation to get me to where I needed to go to the grocery store, to get to work. And it was just such a huge mental toll on me because you have to backwards plan and you have to look at the bus route. And it really, like, honestly, that whole experience made me check my privilege. And it's crazy because I didn't even know how to properly use the bus.
Oh my goodness.
Like it is so sad.
Oh wow.
Because I remember I was getting mad because the bus driver was missing my stop. But you have to understand the only bus that I had taken at that point was like the school bus. So I'm thinking the city bus is like the school bus. They're going to stop at every single stop. The city bus doesn't have time to stop at every single stop. You got to communicate to the driver, the bus driver, by pressing that button saying, hey, can you please stop the bus? This is my stop. And I didn't know that for like the first 2 weeks until I was at work and I was just so frustrated and I had communicated to somebody. I was like, yeah, the bus driver, anytime he comes to my stop, he just wants to speed and zoom past. And like one of my coworkers was like, what are you talking about? So that was one of the challenges that I experienced. I mean, I have a car now, thank God, but that public transportation aspect, I think the other really big challenge is I am constantly sticking out like a sore thumb here because like Asia, it's not a melting pot the way that America is.
Right.
Everyone is of the same hue. They have the same skin color, same hair texture. You know, there'll be slight variations here and there, but most of these people, most of these Japanese have never seen an African American. They've never seen somebody with my hair texture. So when I go out into the public, I am stared at constantly. And it's very interesting because when you understand fear is taught. So oftentimes when children see me, you know, they have curiosity in their eyes. Some of them light up. Some of them will they'll hit their mom or their dad and they'll be like pointing at me and they'll just be like, how is she? Like, who is she? Why is she here? Versus when an older person sees me, there's fear. And it's because they've been taught to fear foreigners. Or a lot of Japanese, though they know English, they are not comfortable speaking English and they do not want to offend us. So the way that they approach it is, well, I'm just not going to say anything at all. And when you don't understand that, you know, you can interpret that as rude, but that's them just trying to be polite and honor you. And again, that goes back to the cultural humility. If you do not have the humility to understand another culture's perspective, you know, you're going to be walking around being offended by everything that they do. When in actuality, oftentimes they're not really trying to offend you.
No.
So that's two challenge. I would say it's a challenge for me because I'm just not used to being stared at. Right. Like that. So it can make going out into public a little uncomfortable, but you kind of have to, like, I can't just stay up in my apartment all day. You have to go out,
have to engage in the culture,
travel things.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
I'm trying to think of, one other challenge is Japan doesn't have a lot of space. Excuse me. So in terms of parking, or even just like how big my apartment is, it was a huge adjustment because I had a house in Texas. I had so much space and I had to downsize. I couldn't even take my furniture. I'm actually using government furniture. Yeah, because my bed and couches and all of that stuff just wasn't going to fit in the housing that was offered here. So I guess, you could see that as a challenge. I'm trying to think of what else. Oh yeah, the language barrier. See how I didn't even mention that first. The language barrier. So before I came to Japan, I was like, oh, I'm going to learn Japanese. I don't know what I was thinking. I thought I was going to have all this time in the world.
Mm-hmm.
I was like, I'm going to learn Japanese while trying to finish up my master's. I can do it. I can do it. Japanese is a very difficult language to learn for the simple fact of, like, it's not like Spanish. It's not like French, where those languages are similar to the American language and our alphabet and some of the rules that we have. Japanese it's a whole nother it's doing its own thing. I was reading this book called Culture Hacks by Richard Conrad, and he was talking about how in Japanese it's very hard to translate between Japanese and English sometimes, because some of the words that we have for English, there's no such thing in the Japanese language. And like one example is they do not say I love you in Japanese.
Right.
Like
right.
to literally translate that to Japanese would be like I like you a lot. They don't use I love you. And it's because in their culture, they're not individualistic. Everything is about group and family.
Right.
And so they don't say I, whereas Western culture, we're very individualistic. So that's just an example to kind of showcase the language barrier there.
Wow. And that's important that we can take from their culture, is that there needs to be more community and not more of self.
Yes.
We push self.
Yes. As
So
a Westerner, it can be hard. That can be hard to accept.
I can understand. And I think that's something that other cultures should think about, is how can they embrace that we over me method, which is us doing things together to empower humanity. And so that's powerful. I just learned something today, so you helped me today. What is your biggest failure, and what did you learn from it?
Okay. I don't like the word failure because it has such a negative connotation. When I think of failure, what comes to my mind is, okay, I can't recommit to this. This is the last end all be all. So when I had to change my approach to the word failure and change my mindset to failure, because in the past, oftentimes when I failed at something, I would shut down. And you cannot do that as an adult. Unfortunately, life keeps on going with or without you. But to answer your question, I will say, what was my biggest lesson that I've learned? Okay. Biggest lesson that I have learned in my 20s. I was watching a sermon, and I can't remember which pastor said it, but she was talking about how when you're building your relationship with God, you really have to come to him for everything. You got to come to him for guidance, and he gives you the go ahead. Right. And I feel like when I was in my early 20s, I really struggled with that. I would come to God with the big things, but I wasn't coming to him for the minute things. And oftentimes the little things can add up to the big things. Right. And so I would say my biggest lesson is everything that you maintain or build, or I'm messing this up. Everything that you build in your own strength, you have to maintain in your own strength. You have to maintain it by yourself. Versus when you invite God into the decisions that you are going to make, when you invite God into the opportunities that you want to have, you are no longer maintaining those things by yourself. He is maintaining it with you. And I really, unfortunately, learned that lesson through burnout. And it was it was a tough lesson to learn because on the outside, everyone thought, oh my gosh, Janine is winning.
Mm-hmm.
She's accomplishing all of these things. But I was burnt out.
I understand.
Everybody was like, oh, she just closed on a house. She just got promoted. She's about to take a job overseas. I was burnt out, running on fumes, because I was sitting there trying to make all of these moves and do all of these things on my own. And I think the other really big lesson in that is kind of like what you were saying. You have to be in tune with yourself, and you have to know yourself. Society has a very nasty way of pressuring you into wanting certain things or doing certain things. And oftentimes you have to ask yourself, okay, why am I working so hard to achieve this? Like, why do I want this so bad? Does this align with what God wants for me? Is this what God called me to do? You have to ask yourself those questions.
Right.
You also have to repeatedly ask God to guide you. That is a prayer that I always gravitate back to. God, order my steps, order my steps, order my steps. Because you cannot do things on your own. And that was my biggest failure. Just trying to operate and do things in my own strength. Because when you really think about it, God is always 2, 3, 4 steps ahead. He knows your entire life. He knows he knows all the curveballs. He knows all the hills and valleys, all of it. So it's just like, why are you not trying to get in with the playmaker? He's gonna guide you.
Right.
And again, all of these things are easier said than done. It's easier said than done, but it's a process.
The process. And that's very true, that we have to go through the process in order to see the end result. And it's always that we understand the power behind us listening to the voice of God and coming to God with all that we have. Even the smallest thing, like you said, coming to him with everything, because he can be so that he can be able to help us move into where we need to go. And if we do not do that, we're still failing or struggling with this thing that's causing us so much tension. And I promise you, I understand burnout. I understand how you can be at the top of your game, but inwardly you're dying. And so it's important to keep your soul restored and renewed and replenished, so that in the end you will feel much better inwardly inside, rather than what people see on the outside. And I'm always about how am I doing inwardly, because if I'm not doing good inwardly, I'm just putting out things that that I'm just faking, outwardly, because I'm just putting on.
It's inauthentic. It's inauthentic. Yeah.
Right. And so Brene Brown wrote a perfect book.
I love her.
That's my favorite researcher. So so she wrote an important book about about imperfection, and how we are in how we should look at ourselves as imperfect beings. And by you moving to another country, it prepared you to not look from a westernized perspective when you had to move from a perfectionist society into yourself becoming imperfect in a society that you do not know about. And so it's so it's always important.
Okay, I see what you did there. Wow.
So it's the challenge for you was trying to switch from the westernized perfectionist society to now you have to become imperfect in order to be open to embrace the culture. And what you said, have cultural humility.
I also have something to add, though. This is something that I have learned from the Japanese. It's funny that you say that Western culture, I will say you see it more so in social media where we really push perfection.
Right.
But when you talk about in business,
Mm-hmm.
we almost embrace mistakes
Mm-hmm.
because those mistakes help us learn lessons.
Right.
And then, we get better at conducting our business.
Mm-hmm.
In Japan, it's literally the total opposite.
Right.
They do not like to make mistakes
Mm-hmm.
at all,
Right.
to the point where they will not even try.
Mm.
And that in itself, just watching how many opportunities are missed
Mm-hmm.
because they're hesitant or
Right.
because they don't want to try, because
Mm-hmm.
they've never done this before, they don't know how it's going to
Mm-hmm.
pan out, and they can't do it perfectly. It's almost emboldened me to let go of my perfectionism, because I still struggle with that.
Right.
Because it's just like, I don't have to get it right on the
Mm-hmm.
first time.
Mm-hmm.
I don't have to.
Right.
As long as I'm willing to keep on trying.
Mm-hmm.
You can be committed to excellence and still make mistakes
Mm.
and still achieve excellence at the end of the day.
Mm-hmm.
The key is, are you learning? What have you learned each day that brought you closer and closer to that standard of excellence?
Mm-hmm. Wow. Wow.
I think like Japanese culture has really villainized
Mm-hmm.
mistakes, but mistakes is not
Right.
the villain that you think it is.
And
It's
so
not.
that's why going from perfection to perfection, you're coming in as an imperfect person, because now
Right.
you are bringing a piece of the puzzle that's missing, which is sharing with people in the Japanese culture that if you mess up, good, because it's only
Yeah.
going to help you grow inwardly. Mess ups look bad on the outside. It looks very
Right.
nasty and it looks horrible. And people perceive you a certain way when things fall down in your life outwardly.
Mm-hmm.
But inwardly,
Right.
if you have yourself together, which what they see outwardly, you don't worry about, because you have
Right.
yourself prepared on the inside, and that pushes
Right.
you towards that pushes you because you're disciplined. That pushes you because you know yourself. And so since you know
Yes.
yourself, now you can move into being what God has always created you to be. And
Yes.
this is why it's important that I brought you on the Merge podcast, because you're a merger. So, so I want to ask you this closing, and I have two questions, but I'm going to ask you these closing thoughts, and it's this. What's the biggest takeaway you hope listeners learn from what we had in our conversation today? And the last question is, what does merge mean to you?
Okay. The biggest takeaway is I want viewers to leave feeling inspired. I remember when I had when I first found out that I was coming to Japan, and I know, I don't have a lot of followers on Instagram, whatever, but I am very cognizant of the small little influence that I do have.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that everybody has the ability to influence others. You don't have to have X amount of followers on social media, whatever, but just showing the importance of traveling.
Mm-hmm.
And it doesn't necessarily have to mean, okay, I have to go to a different country. Travel outside of your neighborhood.
Mm-hmm.
Travel outside of your county. Travel outside of your state. You can take baby steps, but at the very least, get out of your comfort zone.
Mm-hmm.
Challenge yourself. Challenge stereotypes or implicit bias that you have. Ask yourself, okay, well, where did those beliefs come from? I think the other thing that I really want viewers to take away is pace. I felt an immense pressure in my early 20s to achieve certain things by X amount of age. And if I didn't achieve it at this age, then, I wasn't successful.
Right, right.
And I think, that type of thought process can be very detrimental to somebody's mental health. You can go to school and, get a bachelor's degree in your 30s. You could start your family at 42. Everybody's life is different. And I think because of social media, we've gotten into this game of, okay, who can achieve X amount of things by this age, and I gotta compare what I'm doing to everybody else. Like, no, be who God called you to be. Ask yourself, are my behaviors, decisions, actions that I'm taking towards my goal, whatever you want to accomplish, does that align with who God has called me to be? That's all you got to focus about. That's what your focus should be on. You shouldn't be worried about what everybody else is doing. And then to take the age away from your achievements, because that doesn't determine, how hard you worked or how great of a person you are. Age is, it's a number. It's a number. That's all it is. It's a number. And I think just the last thing of like cultural humility. I'm gonna I'm gonna say that again because it's so important. Even if you aren't in a foreign country, America is very culturally diverse. And in order to really understand where somebody else is coming from, you got to take into account their cultural background.
Right.
You have to be respectful, even if that person is different than you, even if that person makes different choices and lives a life that is different from you. That doesn't make them bad And what does merge mean to me? So when I think of the word merge, and I'm a visual person, so in my head, I'm seeing almost like a scrapbook, like a culmination of things, culmination of things that you want to be. When you think of merging, it's two things coming together. And oftentimes when you want to merge something, it has to be mutual benefit, like there's mutually benefiting each other. And so, you just want to, where was I going with this? When two things come together, oftentimes, you want it to be mutually beneficial. And I think that's something that you can apply to your life, whether it's in friendships, whether it's in relationships. Like when you think of weddings, it's the merging of two families. And there may be a little drama that comes with that, but it should be mutually beneficial. And I think if you want to approach a lifestyle, I guess, or adopt a merge mindset, you want to be aware of, okay, what things am I bringing together? And is it mutually beneficial?
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, we have been blessed today by my friend Janine Hume-Dawson. And so I am so excited that you have stayed this long to hear our conversation, to hear the power of cultural humility and us being able to embrace other cultures and becoming disciplined and being our authentic self. And so this is all important. And this is all what Merge Podcast is about. It's bringing people on the podcast that will help us to live life together. So I want you to like this podcast, share this podcast, and be able to subscribe to our channel. And guess what? I need you to go follow Janine Hume-Dawson. Let us know where we can contact you from and boost your Instagram up a little bit and go from there.
Okay, so my Instagram name is Janine, Janine _ _ and then Hume, Janine Hume.
Janine Hume, and I'll talk to you later. Thank you for my listeners for joining us today, and we'll see you.